A country at the crossroads. The United States in the late 1950s and through the 1960s is a landscape marked by fracturing dreams and mounting unrest. The promises of post-war prosperity ring hollow for millions. Segregation festers, cities tremble with unrest, and the air is thick with the hope and fear of change. In gray Midwestern towns, the winds carry whispers of revolution, yet also the ache of communities left behind by progress. For African Americans, the daily reality is one of exclusion and humiliation, even as the civil rights movement seeks to pry open the doors of opportunity. The working class feels the cold steel of economic downturn. Everywhere, the pillars of trust, government, church, family begin to erode. It is here, in this vacuum of certainty, that new prophets emerge. Some promise salvation, others belonging. But beneath every promise, there lingers uncertainty, a sense that the old ways are dying and nothing truly safe will take their place. The streets of Indianapolis, Indiana, are a microcosm of these tensions. Here, the scent of damp brick and diesel mingle with the persistent echoes of sermons and protests. Churches overflow with restless souls searching for meaning, for a place to belong in a world that seems to have left them behind. In the alleys, poverty is not just a condition, it is a sentence, a quiet verdict passed on entire neighborhoods. The city's heartbeat is irregular, skipping between hope and despair with every passing day. The 1960s are a decade of contradictions. The optimism of the space race, the horror of assassinations, the eruption of anti-war protests. Television flickers with images of violence and promise, marches on Washington, burning cities, the faces of leaders both revered and reviled. The American dream, once a beacon, now seems fractured, its light dimmed by the weight of inequality and disillusionment. In this era, traditional institutions struggle to maintain their grip. Churches, once the moral backbone of communities, are increasingly seen as out of touch, unable to address the urgent needs of the people. Political leaders speak of progress, but their words often dissolve into empty rhetoric. The sense of betrayal is palpable, especially among those who have always stood at the margins. For many, faith in the system is not just shaken, it is shattered. It is in this climate of uncertainty and longing that the seeds of the People's Temple find fertile ground. The longing for justice, dignity, and human connection is palpable, almost desperate. The promise of a new kind of community, one that transcends race and class, resonates deeply. The idea that a better world is possible, that no one need be left behind, is intoxicating. Into this vacuum steps a man with a voice that promises to shatter all boundaries. But beneath the surface, the shadows lengthen. The very forces that drive people to seek hope also make them vulnerable to manipulation. The hunger for belonging, for a sense of purpose, becomes a double-edged sword. What follows is not just the story of a community, but of an entire nation teetering on the edge of transformation and tragedy. A nation searching for redemption and finding instead the seeds of its darkest hour. America in the late 1950s and 1960s was a land of contradiction, a nation perched between the gleam of post-war prosperity and the shadows of its own unresolved injustices. While the suburbs filled with the hum of new appliances and the promise of endless possibility, entire neighborhoods and urban centers languished in poverty, their streets marked by neglect and the silent ache of exclusion. The civil rights movement surged, voices rising in protest against segregation and brutality. But for every step forward, there was backlash, violence, fear, and the tightening grip of those unwilling to relinquish power. It was in this fractured landscape that the People's Temple first took root. The world outside was turbulent, but inside the temple, Jim Jones offered something rare, a vision of unity, justice, and unconditional acceptance. His sermons, delivered with hypnotic intensity, spoke directly to the wounds festering beneath the surface of American society. He promised a community where race, class, and background would dissolve, replaced by a shared commitment to equality and compassion. For the marginalized, Black families denied basic rights, the elderly abandoned by their kin, the poor overlooked by the system, Jones's words were not just comforting, they were revolutionary. The temple's doors opened wide. Congregants came from every walk of life, single mothers seeking safety, activists weary from endless struggle, young people yearning for purpose, and elders longing for dignity in their final years. In the glow of the sanctuary, strangers became kin. Members marched arm in arm for civil rights, staffed free clinics, and delivered food to those the city had forgotten. The temple's social programs became a lifeline, and its reputation as a force for good spread beyond the city limits. Local politicians and journalists took notice, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with suspicion. But within the temple, hope was tangible, a fragile, flickering light in a world grown cold. Yet, beneath the surface, subtle changes began to take hold. The sense of belonging that had drawn so many in was slowly entwined with something more insidious. Rules multiplied, and the boundaries between public service and private loyalty began to blur. Jones's charisma, once a source of comfort, grew more commanding, his demands more absolute. Members were encouraged to confess their doubts, to surrender their secrets, to trust the temple above all else, even above their own families. The community that had once promised liberation now began to feel, for some, like a gilded cage. But the outside world was changing too. As the temple's influence grew, so did scrutiny from authorities and the press. Whispers of impropriety, of financial mismanagement, and psychological manipulation began to circulate. Jones responded with defiance, framing every challenge as an attack on the very ideals the temple embodied. The group closed ranks, and the line between us and them became a chasm. Loyalty was tested, and dissent quietly punished. Still, for many, the dream endured. The temple remained a sanctuary for those with nowhere else to go, a place where the promise of a better world seemed, if only for a moment, within reach. But the seeds of disillusionment had been sown. The light that had once guided so many out of darkness now cast long, uncertain shadows. And as the community's faith in its leader deepened, so too did its vulnerability to the forces gathering just beyond the horizon. But what happened next would upend every certainty. The story was about to shift from utopian dream to something far more ominous. It began with whispers in crowded halls and stolen glances behind stained glass windows. Jim Jones, once the embodiment of hope for the marginalized, started to see enemies everywhere. His sermons, once filled with messages of unity and social justice, grew sharp with warnings of betrayal and impending doom. He spoke of conspiracies lurking in every shadow, of forces eager to destroy the sanctuary he had built. The congregation, once buoyed by dreams of equality, now listened with anxious hearts as Jones painted the outside world as a hostile, predatory force. Within the People's Temple, the lines between faith and fear blurred. Members were asked to confess their deepest secrets in front of the congregation, their vulnerabilities laid bare, not as an act of redemption, but as ammunition for control. The sense of belonging that had first drawn them in was slowly replaced by an undercurrent of suspicion. Families were encouraged to report on one another, loyalty tested in cruel and public ways. The community that had once felt like a family now resembled a surveillance state where trust was a currency in short supply. Strict routines replaced the free-spirited activism of the early days. Meetings stretched deep into the night, sleep deprivation becoming a tool for compliance. Personal boundaries dissolved. Every aspect of life was monitored, evaluated, and judged. The temple was no longer just a church. It was a machine, tightening its grip with every passing day. Jones's voice, once a beacon of hope, became an instrument of relentless pressure, echoing through loudspeakers and filling every corner of their lives. Outside, Jones's paranoia grew. He warned of government plots and infiltration by outsiders, convincing his flock that the world was closing in. The once open doors began to close, visitors scrutinized, outsiders distrusted. The temple's social projects continued, but with an edge of desperation, as if the very act of reaching out was now a front in an invisible war. The message was clear. The world beyond the temple was dangerous, and only total devotion could ensure survival. Members were told to prepare for the worst. Drills were held, rehearsing responses to imagined attacks. The promise of salvation became conditional. Obedience was the price. For many, doubts flickered, but the cost of dissent, public humiliation, isolation, or worse, was too high. The fear of being cast out, of losing the only community they had, kept most silent. Even as the rules tightened and the atmosphere thickened with anxiety, hope lingered in the shadows, slowly suffocating. But this was only the beginning. The ideology that once promised liberation would soon demand absolute surrender. The journey from hope to horror had entered a new, irreversible phase. The walls of the temple, once a refuge from a hostile world, now closed in with every passing day, sealing its members inside a reality shaped by fear, manipulation, and the unyielding will of a single man. The seeds of darkness had been planted, and soon they would bear their most poisonous fruit. Jonestown, once painted as a utopian haven, far removed from the violence and discrimination of American streets, became a labyrinth of surveillance and suspicion. The air, thick with the promise of salvation, now vibrated with whispers of betrayal and the silent terror of punishment. Jim Jones, no longer the approachable shepherd, but a figure enthroned in omnipotence, orchestrated every heartbeat within his domain. Armed guards patrolled the perimeters, their rifles glinting beneath the oppressive sun, a stark reminder that paradise was now a prison. The jungle, once a symbol of new beginnings, pressed close, its tangled foliage forming a living barrier between the faithful and the outside world. Escape was unthinkable. Letters to family went unread or were censored. Calls were monitored, and every word spoken within the commune was shadowed by the fear of informants. Jones's voice echoed over the loudspeakers day and night, a relentless tide of sermons and warnings. He spoke of enemies lurking beyond the trees, of plots and conspiracies, of a world that would never understand or accept them. Paranoia spread like a fever. Parents began to fear their own children. Spouses distrusted one another, each believing that a careless word could bring the wrath of the temple's inner circle. Food grew scarce, and hunger gnawed at bodies already worn by endless labor. Disobedience, even the suspicion of doubt, was met with public humiliation, isolation, or worse. Punishments became ritualistic, a spectacle of control. Families were torn apart as Jones demanded confessions, pitting loved ones against each other in a theater of submission. There was no privacy, no sanctuary, not even in the recesses of one's mind. Every thought was a liability, every hope a potential act of rebellion. But the most chilling transformation was internal. Over time, the member's sense of self withered under the constant barrage of psychological pressure. Their dreams, once vibrant with visions of social justice and community, faded into obedience. The collective will of Jonestown was now bent to the design of one man, a man who, with each passing day, grew more erratic. His sermons, once filled with the language of love and equality, now brimmed with threats of annihilation and loyalty unto death. Yet beneath the surface, something even darker was taking shape. The boundary between faith and fanaticism blurred, and the cost of dissent grew ever more severe. The world outside faded to myth. The only reality was the all-encompassing presence of Jim Jones. And as the walls closed in, the final act of this tragedy began to reveal itself, inch by inch in the shadows of the jungle. But this tightening grip was not only physical, it was psychological, spiritual, existential. Jones introduced the infamous White Nights, rehearsals for mass suicide, cloaked as loyalty tests. Under the cover of darkness, he summoned the community, demanding their unwavering devotion, their willingness to die for the cause. Glasses of colored liquid were passed around, and the congregation was told it was poison. Mothers clutched their children, elders trembled, but none dared refuse. After agonizing minutes, Jones would reveal it was only a test, a demonstration of their faith. Relief mingled with dread. Each rehearsal eroded resistance, normalizing the unthinkable. The sense of isolation deepened. The outside world became a phantom, painted as a monstrous enemy. Jones's health declined, his paranoia sharpened, and his dependence on drugs intensified. His speeches grew erratic, laced with apocalyptic warnings and promises of martyrdom. The community, once united by hope, now moved as a single organism, driven by fear, exhaustion, and the desperate need to belong. The line between victim and accomplice blurred, as survival demanded complicity. Here begins the darkest descent, a collective psyche battered and reshaped, preparing, unknowingly, for the ultimate surrender. The jungle waited, silent and watchful, as Jonestown edged closer to the abyss. In those final days, the air in Jonestown thickened with a tension so acute it seemed to press against the lungs. The heat was suffocating, not just from the sun beating down on the corrugated roofs, but from a paranoia that crept through every hut and communal hall. The people, once united by a dream, now moved like shadows, eyes averted, voices hushed, as if afraid that even the trees were listening. The jungle, so alive and indifferent, pressed in on all sides, a green wall that both imprisoned and concealed. Jim Jones, his body weakened by addiction and his mind unraveling, rarely left the loudspeakers that blared his voice across the settlement. He spoke of enemies closing in, the CIA, traitors within, the world outside ready to tear them apart. Every hour, the warnings grew more fevered, the threats more apocalyptic. The concept of revolutionary suicide, once a distant, abstract threat, began to take a terrifyingly concrete shape. It was no longer a hypothetical. It was rehearsed, discussed, woven into the fabric of daily life. The children heard it in their sleep, the elders in their prayers. Trust, that fragile currency, had evaporated, replaced by suspicion as neighbors watched neighbors, each wondering who might be the next to vanish into the jungle, never to return. Even the simplest pleasures, music, laughter, communal meals, had faded into memory. The only constant was Jones' voice, a relentless tide eroding the last resistance in those who still clung to hope. The community's collective psyche, once resilient, now teetered on the edge of collapse, battered by exhaustion, hunger, and the relentless drumbeat of fear. But what happened next was even more chilling. The arrival of U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan, accompanied by journalists and concerned relatives, cracked open the fragile facade. At first, there was cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, an escape was possible. The visitors were greeted with forced smiles, rehearsed words, but beneath the surface, desperation simmered. Desperate notes were passed, pleading for rescue. Faces once blank with resignation flickered with a forbidden hope. For a brief moment, the possibility of salvation seemed real, tangible, within reach. Yet as night fell, hope was extinguished. The murders at the nearby airstrip, bullets tearing through flesh, screams echoing over the grass, signaled the irrevocable. There would be no return, no normalcy, no rescue. The walls of Jonestown, built from faith and fear, now closed in with suffocating certainty. The community, once a tapestry of dreams and ideals, unraveled in the face of violence and betrayal. Here begins the most harrowing chapter. The drums of doom sounded, not from the outside world, But from within the heart of what was once a sanctuary, the final orders were given. The vats were prepared. The line between devotion and destruction vanished. Parents held their children close, torn between love and a twisted sense of duty. Some resisted, pleading, crying, but the machinery of control was absolute. The jungle, always silent, now prepared to swallow the screams. In the end, 918 men, women, and children perished, not as martyrs, but as victims of a dream turned nightmare, their voices lost beneath the canopy, their story echoing as a warning through the corridors of history. In the aftermath, the world awoke to a horror that defied comprehension. News footage flickered across television screens, transmitting blurred images of lifeless bodies sprawled across the Guyanese earth, rows upon rows, silent and still. The magnitude was staggering, the numbers impossible to accept. Governments scrambled to respond, and investigators navigated the suffocating heat and chaos of Jonestown's remains, searching for answers among the abandoned personal effects and the chaos of makeshift structures. The air was thick with a sense of violation, as if the jungle itself recoiled from what had transpired within its depths. But what truly lingered was not just the scale of the loss, but the shockwave that rippled outward from this epicenter of despair. Survivors, those few who managed to escape the machinery of death, carried with them a permanent scar. Their memories became a living repository of warning, a testimony to the fragility of hope when manipulated by unchecked authority. Families back home faced the unthinkable, the realization that loved ones had perished not in noble struggle, but in a manufactured oblivion orchestrated by a man they once trusted. The grief was compounded by confusion, shame, and the relentless scrutiny of a public desperate to understand how such a tragedy could unfold. America and the world grappled with uncomfortable questions. How had an idealistic movement with roots in social justice mutated into a cult of annihilation? How could so many from all walks of life have surrendered their agency to a single figure? The answers were as murky and tangled as the jungle vines that now crept over the ruins of Jonestown. In the years that followed, the specter of the People's Temple haunted public discourse. It became a case study in psychology, sociology, and the dangers of charismatic leadership. New laws were debated, oversight increased over new religious movements, but the ache of uncertainty remained. The phrase, "drinking the Kool-Aid," entered the lexicon, a grim shorthand for blind obedience. Yet the true story was far more complex and far more tragic than any catchphrase could convey. The consequences echoed through generations. Survivors struggled with guilt and trauma, haunted by memories of loved ones lost and the choices they were forced to make. Some found themselves ostracized, unable to explain the depth of manipulation they had endured. Others became advocates, determined to warn the world about the subtle, insidious ways that hope can be weaponized. The families of the dead faced an endless cycle of mourning, their grief compounded by the public spectacle and the persistent questions that would never have satisfying answers. Yet, even as the ruins faded beneath the relentless growth of the rainforest, the legacy of Jonestown persisted. It echoed in every cautionary tale about blind faith, every plea for critical thinking in the face of manipulation. The tragedy was not erased by time. It became a permanent fissure in the modern psyche, an indelible reminder of how easily the line between hope and horror can be crossed. The world watched and learned, but the scars remained, etched into the collective memory, a warning that vigilance is the only true safeguard against the darkness that can grow in the shadow of unchecked power. But the story of Jonestown is not just about the machinery of destruction. It is about the aftermath, the survivors, and those left behind to pick through the ashes of lost dreams. And within their stories lies the most enduring lesson of all. But what happened to those who survived? How did they rebuild their lives in the long, cold shadow of Jonestown? That is where the human face of this tragedy truly emerges. For the survivors of Jonestown, the world they returned to was unrecognizable, a landscape forever altered by loss and betrayal. They emerged from the dense, humid jungle not as the hopeful idealists who had once followed Jim Jones into the unknown, but as witnesses to a trauma so profound that it left scars invisible to the eye, yet impossible to ignore. The air they breathed seemed heavier, the colors of the world dulled by the memory of what they had seen and endured. Many survivors, like Laura Johnston Cole, found themselves adrift in a society that could not comprehend the magnitude of their suffering. The tragedy of Jonestown was quickly transformed by the media into a spectacle, a cautionary tale, a headline. But for those who had lived through it, it was a wound that would never truly close. They carried with them not only the loss of friends and family, but also the shattering of faith. Faith in ideals, in community, and in the very possibility of trust. Survivor's guilt became a constant companion. Why had they survived when so many others had not? The question echoed through sleepless nights and haunted their waking hours. Some survivors withdrew from the world, unable to bear the weight of judgment or the probing curiosity of strangers. Some survivors withdrew from the world, unable to bear the weight of judgment or the probing curiosity of strangers. Others tried to speak out, to lend their voices to the chorus of warning, hoping that by sharing their pain, they might prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. The process of reintegration was fraught with obstacles. There was no guidebook for returning from such darkness. Many struggled with post-traumatic stress, their minds replaying the horrors of Jonestown in endless loops. Nightmares became routine, and the smallest triggers, a sudden noise, a certain scent, a flash of color, could transport them back to that day in the jungle. Relationships with family and friends were strained, sometimes to the breaking point. The world outside seemed indifferent, eager for sensational details but unwilling to grapple with the complexities of healing. Some survivors found solace in small rituals, lighting candles for the dead, speaking the names of those lost, gathering with fellow survivors in quiet remembrance. These acts became lifelines, fragile threads connecting them to a sense of meaning amid the chaos. In these moments, they mourned not only the people they had lost, but also the vision that had once inspired them, the dream of a community built on equality, justice, and love. That dream, so full of promise, had been twisted into a nightmare, leaving behind only fragments of hope. Yet even in devastation, there was resilience. Over time, some survivors began to reclaim their lives, piecing together a new sense of purpose from the ruins. They became witnesses and storytellers, bearing the burden of memory so that others might learn. Their testimonies were not just about warning against blind faith or charismatic leaders, but about the enduring strength of the human spirit. They showed that even in the aftermath of unimaginable darkness, it is possible, though never easy, to move forward. The legacy of Jonestown lives on in the hearts and minds of its survivors. Each day is a testament to endurance, to the quiet courage required to face the past and build a future. Their stories remind us that tragedy does not end with the final act. It lingers, shaping lives in ways both seen and unseen. And in their ongoing struggle to heal, we glimpse the true cost of what was lost and the fragile, persistent hope that something better can still be built from the ashes. But as we contemplate the aftermath, a deeper question emerges from the silence left behind. What truly draws people into the promise of salvation? And at what point does devotion become surrender? Jonestown is not merely a chapter in history. It is a mirror, reflecting humanity's vulnerabilities, our longing for belonging, and the dangers that fester when faith is weaponized by unchecked power. The tragedy forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, leadership, and the boundaries of obedience. It reveals how hope can be twisted, how communities forged in solidarity can, under the weight of fear and manipulation, collapse into darkness. The fields of Guyana are long silent, but the lessons echo through generations. Each warning sign ignored, each voice silenced, each desperate plea lost to the night. These are not distant failures, but reminders that vigilance and compassion must walk hand in hand. Jonestown's legacy is not just the sum of its horrors, but the questions it leaves in its wake. How do we recognize the line between faith and fanaticism? What responsibility do we bear, as individuals and as a society, to those who seek refuge in the promises of charismatic leaders? The answers are neither simple nor comfortable. They demand that we look inward, examining the ways in which we too might be susceptible to the seduction of certainty, the comfort of belonging, the allure of a cause greater than ourselves. In the aftermath, survivors have spoken of the slow, painful process of reclaiming their own voices, of learning to trust again, to question, to resist the pull of collective blindness. Their journeys are reminders that healing is neither linear nor guaranteed. For every person who finds a way forward, there are others who remain haunted by the shadows of what was lost. The trauma of Jonestown is generational, a wound that seeps into families, communities, and the broader fabric of society. Yet within this darkness, there is also a fragile, persistent hope. The willingness of survivors to share their stories, to bear witness to the unthinkable, is itself an act of resistance against oblivion. Through remembrance, we honor not only those who perished, but also the resilience of those who endured. Their courage challenges us to remain vigilant, to question authority, to protect the vulnerable, to recognize the warning signs of manipulation and abuse wherever they may arise. The shadow of Jonestown reminds us that no utopia is immune to corruption, and that the greatest protection against such tragedies is a society that values questioning over blind allegiance, empathy over isolation, and truth over comforting lies. In remembering Jonestown, we honor not only those who are lost, but also the enduring resolve to never let such suffering take root again. We must ask, what kind of world do we build when we refuse to see the warning signs? And what future might we claim if we choose, instead, to face them? In the end, the story of Jonestown is a warning etched in history, a testament to the power of ideals and the peril of their distortion. In remembering Jonestown, we honor not only those who are lost, but also the enduring resolve to never let such suffering take root again. We must ask, what kind of world do we build when we refuse to see the warning signs? And what future might we claim if we choose, instead, to face them? In the end, the story of Jonestown is a warning etched in history, a testament to the power of ideals and the peril of their distortion. It is a call to remember that the search for meaning and community is a fundamental part of the human experience, but that it must always be tempered by critical thought, compassion, and the courage to speak out against injustice. Only then can we hope to prevent the darkness from returning and ensure that the lessons of Jonestown are never forgotten.